Yes, we are.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us. It's a great opportunity to discuss and debate our topic today, access to digital trade and funding linkages through online platforms. My name is Nico Christoforou. I work with the USAID Southern African Trade and Investment Hub. I am one of our finance and investment advisors, along with my colleague, Dr. Hans Balimayura. Hans is also online with us and would be available for questions and discussions. Maybe a little bit about the USA Trade Hub to begin with. The USA Trade Hub works to increase economic growth and export trade in Southern Africa. Through its, we have a few objectives that we work with, and the idea really here is to increase exports from Southern African countries to South Africa and increase exports to the United States under the benefits of the African Growth Opportunities Act, or the AGOA program. Lastly, we look to increase the flow of capital and technology from South Africa to the Southern African countries. So under that objective, increasing capital and technology flow from South Africa to the Southern African countries, we have partnered with capital providers, transaction advisors, and financial learning solutions providers to help us achieve our mandate. One way that was to work with our capital providers to help improve technology and target small and medium businesses and exporters into the digital transformation of export trade and linkages of buyers, sellers, financiers, and logistics. The aim here is to enable small businesses to overcome barriers of cross-border exchanges for goods and services, and support them by competing and participating in export and import trades. So today I'll run through our agenda very quickly. You do have it with you, but our opening session will be for about 10 minutes. We're running a little bit late at the moment. I hope we'll make it up along the way. Our specialist panel, I will introduce them, and they will introduce their business platforms, and that'll take about 5 minutes each. We will then begin our discussion and open up with the audience, and that will take us to around 10:25. The idea here is we have allocated a lot of time in this session to the audience, and we want the audience to lead this discussion, to put questions across and ask and drive this process. So please type your questions in the chat box, and we will read it out to the panelists, and we'll have the discussion through your participation. Lastly, we will have final comments from the panelists for about 5 minutes and closing remarks for 5 minutes. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce our panelists to you. Warwick Blamey. Warwick, unfortunately, is one of our panelists who's battling to come through to the session at the moment. He's having some technical difficulties, and our people are trying to help him out in the background. So as soon as he comes on board, Warwick will introduce himself, and but in the meantime, we'll carry on with Gordon and with Mark. But very quickly, I'll introduce Warwick Blamey. Is a group executive for Sebvest Capital. Warwick started his career at Invecta Holdings before moving into private equity, then investments, where he was head analyst at a leading asset management house, before moving to South African partner of a UK-based BCMS corporate, where he was a deal maker in their mergers and acquisitions division, focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. Warwick's expertise is focused in investments in agriculture, manufacturing, engineering, and services industry, where he has been involved with various transactions over the past decade. Warwick holds a Bachelor of Commerce and a Master's in Business Administration from Edinburgh Business School. Mark Taylor, who is the CEO of New Capital Africa, former senior executive at Richemont and Remgro and head of investment evaluations at Venfin. He has banking, trust company, and family office experience with Investec and associated businesses, hands-on turnaround experience as a CEO, and an international entrepreneur listed and unlisted businesses. Mark is qualified as an attorney with a higher diploma in maritime law, a master's in commerce, completing this with cum laude at UCT, and postgraduate future studies, also completed cum laude at Stellenbosch University. Last but not least, Gordon Bell, also with New Capital Africa. Gordon heads up debt and equity and operations experience in African real estate, active positions in credit, property and trade finance at Investec, Nedbank Corporate and Barclays Africa, real estate operations positions at Octodec for real estate investment trusts and Broll Africa. Gordon has a master's in business administration in strategy and finance, a Bachelor of Science in construction management, and is a member of the Chartered Institute of Building, a prestigious British benchmark. So with that in mind, I will ask each gentleman, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce your organization and your platform. 5 minutes each. We don't have Warwick at the moment from Sebes, but once he joins, we will bring him on board. But I'm going to ask Mark from New Capital to give us a brief about your organization and the platform that you host. Mark, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. I really appreciate being on the event. And again, thank you to USA for placing your confidence in us as a partner in distributing transactions. Perhaps just by way of brief introduction, you'll find, I think, that there are different types of electronic platform that facilitate the movement of capital. And in our case, we're probably a little different to the sort of Amazon type approach, where you would be wanting to aggregate a lot of eyeballs and managing huge movements of data and information which you are analyzing. Our lives don't work quite like that. We regard ourselves a bit like a Tinder for African capital. You can think of us like that, in that we're like a dating site, and we do not perform the role of a corporate finance advisor. We actually sit in a situation where we are I'm going to share my screen just to show you one or two slides. I don't want to kill you with slides, but let me just show you a few. Drop that. They're coming through.
It's buffering. Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay, so to give you a sense of it, we don't fulfill the role of advisor. We fulfill the role of the dating site in between the two parties who want to get married or date or whatever they want to do. But we basically help the corporate finance advisor by becoming their internal distribution capability. So we don't do the IMs, we don't prepare information memorandums, we don't write financial models. We also don't do the due diligence and handle the legal agreements. All we do, is, and we think it's the most important part, is we make sure that the right people take the lead. So our sense of our mission in life is to try and ensure that capital that is coming into Africa gets allocated to the most appropriate places, and that capital that is moving around Africa goes to the most appropriate places. And the difficulty for many people investing in Africa is that it's very obscure, very difficult to get to understand it, especially if you're foreign. Today we're going to be talking about primarily South African investors moving their money into other parts of Southern Africa, in keeping with the mission of USAID in this particular instance, but the same would apply broadly. So if I just show you briefly, we do have an enormous reach of investors across over 300 investors we speak to who are interested in Africa, and roughly half of those would be in Africa, and probably 100 of them are in South Africa, if we're perfectly honest about it. We review tons of inquiries, and we control them very, very carefully before we agree to take on a transaction, to take it to market. And you can see this is at the end of June. We've seen 700 inquiries over the 3 years that we've been operating, and we at that stage had only engaged on 19 to help them raise capital. That number is now significantly up since then, as we've beefed up our team. And just so you have some awareness of how we operate and what our team looks like. So there's Gordon and myself, and we've worked together for many, many years. Gordon taught me everything I know about property, and he's forgotten most of that stuff, but very experienced in debt real estate. Barry, ex-head of analysts at Nedbank, and Ben heads up energy, and he's an ex-EY executive in capital raising and energy. So we have a very broad set of skills. We do endeavour to be the clean platform for clean deals in Africa. Now offering to our investors, when they sign up to look at deals with us, we don't charge them any money. We vet the deals ourselves. We don't just laundry list them. So every single deal we vet in detail. We don't due diligence, but my goodness, we make sure that that deal passes the sniff test and smells like roses. Otherwise, we will wreck our relationships with our investors when we go out to them. And we operate incredibly discreetly. We do not share information. We never go out with anything but an anonymized teaser. We're very, very discreet about how we operate. And that's particularly important for family offices.
Mark, just a comment. It's coming up quite small. There's a few queries that are coming through. If you can just broaden it or
I'm going to hit
presentation mode, I think.
Yeah, I apologize. Let me just pick up my
and then maybe just
chat mode. Okay. Can't see the slideshow. Might be on another screen. Is that the question you were asking?
Yeah, there was one. Can you share in presentation mode? Was Honorato Chipier's one, Chipepo.
Oh, are we not in presentation mode? I thought we were.
It's still the same, Mark.
Well, that's a bit better.
Okay. A little bit better.
Yeah, that's it.
That works.
Sorry, which screen are you seeing? Is it the full screen or just the?
Have we seen the slide now, Mark? It's fine.
It's okay. We can carry on, Mark.
Gordon, what's the slide's name, please?
We are on the
investor distribution. Yeah.
Specialist investor distribution. We can see that one, Mark. I think we can carry on where you are.
I'm not sure why that's happening. I apologize. I do apologize to the people who can't see it. Let me just see if I can improve that. Sorry.
Not a problem. When you do the dry runs, everything works perfectly. Unfortunately,
I'll tell you what. I don't. Talking to the slides is probably. Let me not talk to the slides and just continue running through this. I mean, basically, as I was saying, our role is to work with corporate finance advisors, quality corporate finance advisors, and we basically provide an in-house service to distribute their transactions to investors. The investors we get to know, we make sure we know them well, we make sure that we understand their mandates, and our objective typically when an advisor comes to us and says, can you help us find money for our clients? We are typically saying to them, sure, we can do that. We get to understand the deal, and then invariably the advisor's request is, how many people can you get to? And we'll say, well, we probably know maybe 30 or 40 people who would be interested in this, but if we work really hard, we can limit it to 7. And that's really the point. We try to be really accurate, and our game is not a volume game, so we don't operate on a volume basis. We never really check the metrics as to how many people are looking at the deals. We just want to make sure that the best people are looking at them, and that may only be 5 or 6 people a day. It's not 500 or 600,000 a day. So I think that's probably important just to note. We never charge investors. We're regulated in the UK, so we have to keep a very careful track on the regulatory process. I think I've probably said enough. Other than perhaps to describe our business model, we make our money out of sharing fees with the corporate finance advisor. So that would be both a retainer, it would be a share of the success fee, and we only ever operate where we're exclusively retained, because that typically gets the best results for the client, rather than having people running around across the market all trying to help raise money because you get investor collisions, and that's a dreadful outcome for someone raising capital is an investor collision when the deal gets to the same investor through 2 or 3 different sources. It really wrecks the deal. So that's perhaps. Gord, have I left anything out? Okay, I'm gonna zip it now, and I'm gonna turn my slides off. I'm sorry about that, guys.
Mark, thank you very much for that. Certainly sounds if I could summarize it, a credible matchmaking platform. Thank you for that. Warwick, we cannot see you, but hopefully we can hear you. Are you able to talk and hear us? I hope.
Well, good morning, Nico. Apologies, we've had a few issues on our side from a technical perspective. So, unfortunately, the camera won't be on, but I hope you can hear me loud and clearly.
We can, and if you can maybe just talk us through Sebvest Capital and your African trade platform.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Nico. African Trade Platform, it has been set up to link buyers, sellers, financiers, and logistics providers within the transactional environments within Africa. If we can differentiate from near capital, from a direct investments, if you think of a transaction taking place, that's with the buying and selling of products. That's a space that African Trade Platform steps into. With regards to commodities, agri products, energy, any product that's traded on a large volume or larger scale, is something that African Trade Platform would facilitate and tap into. From a buying and selling perspective, I think the best way to look at it is just to take an example. If you've got macadamia nuts, for an example, in Zambia, and you've got a farmer looking for a market, the farmer would upload his products, or if it's a trader or processor, upload their products onto the African Trade Platform. You would then have a buyer, wherever it is in the world, either South Africa, USA, Europe, etc., who would log onto the platform and search for the products that they require to buy. Now, today, I just want to focus the attention onto one of the four pillars, and that's been the financing of the transactions. So once your buyer has logged on from the USA, your seller is in Zambia, in most cases there's a financing aspect to the transaction that needs to take place, and that's where the financing angle of the platform steps in. Now, in general, in most cases, you would have your seller. It's either needing finance if they're a processor to actually acquire the nuts from various suppliers, if it's farmers or traders, or you may find a case where you've actually got your buyer who's sitting in America that actually needs finance to acquire the nuts because there's a long delay from a shipment process perspective before the nuts actually get to the USA before they actually receive their funds. Now, what the platform does on our side is it gathers information from a buyer and seller perspective, and at the same time has a large database of, or I wouldn't say database, a large panel of trade financiers that links up each transaction to the specific mandates of the financiers. Now, from a financing perspective, you may think that it's quite simple. You've got a financier, you've got a transaction, and every financier would look at it, but it's not actually the case in practicality, where by financiers have certain mandates that they will look at. They'll only look at certain sectors. They'll, for an example, only finance the buyers from a trade finance perspective, where supply chain finance or purchase order finance is a whole different ballgame for different financiers. So what the platform does is it utilizes algorithms to match financiers with their specific mandates to specific transactions in the marketplace, to then streamline a deal flow to the specific financiers that actually fits the mandate that they are actually willing to look at. And by doing that, it increases the efficiencies, the timelines, the turnaround times, it's for finance for specific transactions in the market. And then the platform will then continue with the logistics and everything else that takes part in a specific transaction. So that's it from our side. Thanks, Nico.
Thank you, Warwick. Very similar, but yet very different. We have the Sevest platform and we have the New Capital platform. Well, I think without further ado, let's begin and go into the discussion. As I said in the beginning, I think a lot of this is going to be driven by our audience. We want the audience to participate, want the audience to ask their questions, so please send through your questions to the chat box. But I will begin with a question and put it through to our panelists, and I want you each to please give me your views. So my question is, and I think it's a general question, what is the role of a digital platform versus the traditional role of export and import trade, and why would it be of benefit to members that join your platform? Gordon, you haven't spoken, so I'm going to begin with you and ask you for your views.
Okay, interesting question. Nick, thanks very much, and thanks again for allowing us on the platform. I think our offering of service is quite different. I mean, we're largely capital matching as opposed to the little transactions. And we'd probably come in more if you had a trade financier wanting to fund their trade finance book. And then the actual trades within that would probably be done through Warwick's platform. But yeah, we're largely focused on the sort of 5 to 50 million market. Essentially, that's it, yeah. I don't know, Mark, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think in a way you might see what Warwick does is a little bit more wholesale, as retail, as it were. Warwick with permission, I mean, you correct this, and what we do is perhaps a bit more wholesale. So where you're raising capital for your business overall, even if you're raising money for a debt fund or something like that, we would raise that capital for somebody. So in the sort of, what he says, 5 to 50, I mean, we typically work in the $5 to $50 million range, or 30 million rand to 500 million rands, but we, for the purposes of working with USAID, that number we've reduced so that we can help, we can provide our service to smaller transactions as well.
Yep.
Well,
yeah, Nick, if I could jump in there, I think the best way that I can describe it is utilizing technology to bridge the gap with where inefficiencies have been laid in the past. It's utilizing means of tech to increase the speed at which matching actually takes place. If you take the example of a trade now, it's a company looking for trade finance or company looking to sell their product, they may need to go approach 30, 40, 50 different trade financiers before they find 2 or 3 that actually fit the mandate of what they actually require that finance for. And it's just that process. It could be a couple of weeks, months, even just to run through that back and forth. It's between, and that's even if you can find the 40, 50 trade financiers. Being an individual, it may be extremely difficult just to get through those barriers. And that's what the platform is doing, is utilizing that tech to increase those efficiencies and create that matching immediately.
Yeah, I think what Warwick raises is very interesting, and it's just triggered a broader response in my mind. Typically, how we would operate is, a client will come to us, we'll put a deal together, we'll put a teaser, a 2-page anonymized teaser together. We will then distribute that quite widely to a target investor list. So we'll probably go to, say, 20 investors. It's anonymized, they don't know who the client is, they're not quite sure. Immediately they can say, no, we're not interested. Now, typically what you would do is, if you were in commerce, you'd go out, you'd meet those investors, sit down, have a cup of coffee, share the deal with them,
right.
And then they suddenly realize, oh, they don't want the deal anyway. Whereas here they can say, anonymous teaser, okay, we don't like the sector, we don't like it, we don't have appetite for it right now, our appetite has changed, and maybe Mark can comment later on private family offices and how they work. So immediately we're not going to waste their time. I mean, what we pride ourselves in that the selection of investors that we choose are pretty closely matched to what the offering is. And then, if the investor, let's say 5 of them come back and say, hey, that's exactly what we like, then what we can do is we clear with the capital seeker, are you happy we now share the detail with this investor? And the capital seeker, invariably they say yes. We'll swap the NDAs and then put the full deal in front of the right target investor, as opposed to going out laboriously in front of a whole lot of them. So Warwick's quite right. It does make the process more efficient. We're not a sort of a sort of shotgun approach. Our platform, it's very sort of select. We have a niche of investors we'll take it to, but it's a far more accurate process and it's more efficient. We've been able to get results from it. Correct.
Is there a distinct benefit to go digital and go online as opposed to working the old traditional way? Why should a member sign up and come on board onto these platforms? Mark?
I think again, just distinguish, obviously making that distinction. I mean, the reason someone would come on, an investor would want to be on our platform because the transactions we're showing them have been vetted. They're clean. We've done background checks, and although they haven't been due diligence, they can take a great deal of confidence in speaking to people who obviously the team that knows what's going on. So we are much less algorithm driven than, for example, Warwick. Warwick is dealing with much larger volumes of transaction information. We deal with quite a lot less in some respects. So that would be the benefit to an investor, to someone raising capital. What you don't want to do when you're raising capital, firstly, you want to make sure you reach the right investor. Secondly, you want to do it as fast as you can, as efficiently as you can, with somebody who gives you credibility when they take you to those investors. So if it's your uncle calling up because he knows a banker at Investec, he banks at Investec, that's very different to somebody calling up directly the investment team, and we know each other and we understand, we talk the same language. That's a very different way of doing this. So I would say that that's probably a distinction.
Warwick, from SEP's perspective, benefits of having small businesses come and join your platform?
Yeah, Nico, from a reach perspective, it's definitely going to add an advantage. It generates a new market, new interest. I mean, if you're a small business and you've got your markets already set up, you're happy with your current buyers, and you're not looking to expand, then I don't see a huge need. But if you are sitting and you are looking to expand, you are looking to export, you are looking to generate foreign currency and increase your markets, then I believe this is a great way for anyone, and it can be a small to medium enterprise up to large corporations. There's no set limit on the size of the company that you need to be to actually join onto the platform. At the end of the day, the market speaks for itself. If you're only going to sell one bag of groundnuts, then you're not going to maybe attract the attention of a large buyer from the US. But if you're consolidating and your processing facility, the market will talk for itself in the end, and that's what the platform's doing. It's opening up options. It's opening up markets. It's also giving access to foreign buyers to markets in Africa that actually have been vetted, and that's one of the big advantages to our platform, is that every supplier that does come on is vetted and bridges that gap, that fear that there is in many buyers from an international perspective, where they are fearful for buying products in Africa that actually haven't been vetted, and that's a bridge that the platform is actually putting together to allow that comfort. So from an advantage perspective, I mean, I can go on all day, but I think that should sum it up.
I think we're going to... Mark, you have a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that's interesting also that Warwick brushed across, but which I think is useful just to note the difference between the kinds of things that we do as two different platforms. You know, if you're selling shares, ordinary shares on a listed exchange, it's an absolutely standard product. And anyone who buys a share in Anglo American or Barlow, they know what they're buying. It's easy.
Yeah.
As you move to the extreme where we operate in, and you are buying something that's quite bespoke, it's an investment instrument in a private company that has been structured in a way to suit that particular company and those particular investors, it can get really, really complicated. You just cannot standardize that stuff. On that spectrum will sit the trade finance, probably easier to standardize as a solution, but what we do is really not easy to standardize. So again, one of the reasons why we tend to operate with much smaller numbers of conversations. We use a very detailed CRM system to deeply understand the investors. And a lot of what we do is built around, we try to create a real world network and credibility around what we do. And we effectively using technology to facilitate the process, not to disrupt the process, if I can put it that way. And that's quite an important distinction, because the stuff we do tends to be quite a lot bigger in size and a lot more complicated. And the point is, so let me leave it like that.
It sounds like there's still a lot of work that individuals have to do on their own. You're a facilitator. You provide the linkages. Am I correct? We're going to go to some questions that are coming through, and this one has been partly answered, but if you could each answer it again. What is the minimum currency investment for capital investors, and how do we start engaging with Neo Capital and with Sebvest? Mark, you start, and then I'll cross over to Warwick.
I've put my email up on the chat, and Gordon can do the same, but I'm sure you'll be able to get the email from USA. And we would, you can give us a call, drop us an email. The primary, we would typically start, we normally start at higher value levels, but with USA, we will do down to $1 million. We might even go less. Just depends on how promising the transaction is and how easy we think it is to find the investors.
Gordon, is there a specific sector that you concentrate on? Or are you across the board?
No, we're across the board, all sectors. I mean, we do find some sectors are in vogue, and certain sectors drift from their popularity with investors. And also we find there's different investors. I mean, you get your DFIs, they seem to be quite keen on agriculture and development type projects and infrastructure. You get your normal institutions, and then Mark's probably best positioned to speak of private family offices. But it's our key skill is trying to match that investor's appetite with the right deal as quickly as we can.
Warwick, from Sebvest perspective, minimum ticket size and sectors that you focus on?
But from our side, there's no minimum and maximum. That can get uploaded onto the platform. It's very driven by market demand. As I said earlier, you can put a bag of groundnuts onto the platform, but you may not find the demand for it. It's from an export perspective to the US, where maybe a container might be the minimum that would be looked at from that perspective. So I think that answers our minimum and maximum question.
Before, maybe that triggers a question for me. What do you expect your client, so to speak, that comes onto the platform to have? How should they be ready to interact and work on the platform? What do you need from them? Gordon, let's start with you.
Yeah, Typically, if it's a capital seeker, we like to work through corporate advisors, and I mean, there's a whole separate topic here, because when you present a deal to an investor, it's very important that the presentation pack is quite succinct, it's accurate, it speaks to the issues, and it's investor ready is a classic word that the market uses. The client must be investor ready. Often you get clients who'll approach you and they want to just shoot the breeze about a concept that they've got. Whereas we find with a good corporate advisor, and we do have some that we work through with USAID as well now, is that they're able to articulate the client's needs properly, they look through it properly, and they present the right financial information. And we find that particularly if you're looking at sort of business that are in Africa that are, I spent a lot of time doing credit risk at Barclays Africa as well. And often you'll find what is a typical business bank client in South Africa might be quite a big corporate in the rest of Africa. And often you'll find the businesses are run with, it's sort of a very qualified, skilled family member doing the books or something like that. And it's just ironing through those issues and getting the best business case in front of the potential investor. So yes, we like to work with corporate advisors. And then in investors, we just want our investors to be clean. If somebody comes in, we need to know that they're clean, they're not politically connected. And a co-investor is not going to look up one day and say, oh, goodness me, I'm now investing along with some absolute find from some dreadful part of Africa. How do I get out of this, So obviously it's up to investors to do their due diligence properly, but, we've got to present them with a clean and accurate process. And that's where Mark says we do take quite a bit of the mystique out of Africa. People do see it as a place for opportunities, but just presenting the right deals and articulating them properly to the investor audience. Yeah.
Warwick, what do you look for from an investor or a client that comes on board your platform?
So I think that would be twofold. So it would be from the supplier side. That would go through our full vetting process, just to make sure that the supplier is actually real, that the company actually does exist, that there are products that the supplier is actually selling, verification, just to make sure that who the supplier says they are is correct. A further due diligence will take place on the actual supplier once a transaction is in process. So that's from a supplier side. From a buyer's perspective, same will take place at full FICA verification. It's of the actual buyers, proof of funds, proof of transactions in the past, just to get a feeling of whether the buyer has actually done transactions, is doing transactions, the capacity of the buyer. It's at the end of the day, what we're linking up here is verified individuals, no time wasters, so that we can actually get credible transactions on the table. And that is one of the big issues in the actual trade industry, is your fly-by-nights, buyers, sellers who actually aren't vetted, aren't real, scam artists, fraudsters. It's to sift through that and actually get down to credible transactions.
And Gordon, we have a question here. It says, are you then the middleman to the sector for investors?
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you've got an analogy with the dating game. I mean, you're like the mother-in-law, matching the parties and hoping it goes well.
Just a middleman, absolutely, Nico. We try to make sure that we put the right parties together around the right deals, and it requires a very deep understanding of the capital markets, the private capital markets in Africa. I've just popped a note up. Georgia asked a question on what we look for. I mean, it's quickly typed, so apologies if it's not very pretty and it's not very comprehensive. But Georgia, you'll find those details on screen right now in the chat. I hope that is useful. That's the kind of stuff. If we get an email, it's a couple of paragraphs long capturing that, we can evaluate really quickly whether we'll be able to help and whether it's worth checking for.
So people, please keep your questions coming. We want this to be an interactive process. Maybe I can trigger another question, and it's one that, given the small and medium-sized businesses and exporters that we work with, do you believe there's appetite and ability to shift to a digital landscape? And do they need complicated infrastructure to be able to participate? Gordon, you can start.
No, I think with technology being so widely available, I wouldn't say that you need complicated infrastructure to be able to participate. I mean, you can literally access our platform with your cell phone, and operate like that. But you do need robust processes of corporate governance if you're a capital seeker, and likewise if you're an investor. But no, there aren't robust processes. What I can just say as well is with platforms, it's not a sort of a get-rich-quick scheme. Often there's a perception that, gee, getting to technology, and the word fintech is used quite liberally, and you get the situation where you suddenly got this huge client base and it scales up big. Our model didn't work like that. Our model was a lot of hard work, we haven't lost the high touch approach. We don't just dehumanize. We're very much in contact with our clients. They know us. They can track reference us. So we still very much a high touch approach with our product offering. So it's not just a broad scale outreach program where we have a bulletin board, put the deals up there. But that's for our particular aspect of the business. There are other business models. I mean, Warwick has got a very, and also the other thing is, and Warwick will tell you as well, that the models evolve over time. As his machine learning gets better and better, it gets more accurate. We don't really rely on machine learning. We are the machines still, but we certainly are able to distribute efficiently. We believe, and certainly our clients, to bring value to the transactions and be more accurate. I mean, between the four of us, there's a lot of experience.
That human touch remains.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that? Has that been summed up?
Yeah, I think Gordon, that's a very good point there. It's where I think that also differentiates the approaches where we actually are focused on that automated tech computer learning perspective, where we've got a 20-year plan which is heavily backed by the tech algorithms, data learning, data capturing perspective, where we actually see all transactions post 10 years all happening on an automated basis, backed by blockchain, where you've got your buyers, sellers, financiers, logistics companies all getting triggered by certain events taking place in the actual trade process. With that data learning, that data that's gathered on buyers and sellers, giving different participants different ratings in the actual markets, which then gives comfort to the other various participants acting in the ecosystem to allow transactions to happen with ease, with little human interaction. So that's definitely where we're going. And a part of the African Trade Platform, we've got a highly advanced tech team that's actually backing it, that actually previously ran all the back-end software linking prime brokers to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, running over 20 million messages per day, over 50 stock exchanges around the world. So that's the capacity that we're building on, but it will only kick in over time once that data is actually gathered. So, Nico, to answer your question, it is tech or platforms or software accessible in the market. I think from a cloud-based perspective, it's definitely become a lot more accessible than it was in the past. And from a utilization perspective, it's becoming easier and easier. And transactions will need to. I think there'll be a push from our side and market participants to actually actually let it become a requirement to participants to actually utilize that tech, because it does give that governance oversight side of it, and allows that to actually kick into the transaction itself.
Right. People, please keep your questions coming through. We want this to be interactive. Send your questions through to the chat box. Maybe another question. The idea here is that, well, what we are trying to do as the USA Trader is to support the whole process towards the smaller and the medium-sized exporter and increase their ability to be able to trade. Does this give the smaller guy a benefit? Is this a platform that can help them compete and to be a part of a process that's traditionally there for the larger corporates? Mark, your feeling?
So, Warwick, I lost you for a second, so I was just typing a note to Georgia on her question, but I can answer. Yeah. Can you just repeat that about the corporates? I missed the last statement you made.
My question is, we are working with a platform, a digital way that traditionally would support the smaller, medium-sized exporters and help them to be able to compete. Is this true, and does that actually work? Will they be able to compete against the larger corporates?
Yeah, look, I absolutely believe that. I mean, I do think that the huge advantage of the tech revolution of using platforms, and I think we'll see it sooner in Warwick's business than in our own business, but it very definitely enables the little guy to take on the big guy, because the big guy has typically access to tremendous information, tremendous resources, and when you're competing against that, you're going into the boxing room with Mike Tyson. You've got a blindfold on and one arm tied behind your back, and you're going to take on Mike Tyson, right? So that's the challenge that we need smaller operators face. And I think that both in Warwick's space and in our own space, what we try to do is to give to enable a service that is top-notch, a Goldman Sachs type service, or a top-end trading type service, I suppose, for a lesser cost, and to use technology to make that possible. So I think it's definitely important.
Yeah.
Warwick, your feeling?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Mark, and I mean, we're already seeing it in the retail space. It's in Europe, USA, it's even in South Africa. You take a look at what Uber has done, what Uber Eats have done, what online shopping has done. I mean, you're now bringing that whole ecosystem into a level playing field, and that's once again allows your smaller guys to get access to finance, to get access to logistics, to get access to markets that your corporates would in the past would have had to themselves, without allowing your small to medium enterprises to actually partake in. So I 100% agree.
Yeah, I think it's the way forward, and they keep on growing. Mark, we have a question for you about fees, chargeable for facilities for accessing funding. Please clarify. Mark, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yes, did you see how quickly that answer popped up? That was the one I was typing when I missed you earlier, and I didn't quite follow. I had to ask you to repeat it. Yeah, so our fees are what I would say are market related. We don't typically give an indication until we understand what the deal is and what the requirements are. Georgia, because I think you were the person who asked the question. But for us, it's very important to make sure we understand what actually is going to be required. We found a number of times we go into deals, and it actually gets harder as the deals get smaller. So if you're raising R1 million for somebody, they typically don't have a corporate finance officer, a chief financial officer. They don't typically have a company secretary. They don't have a legal team, a legal department. They're raising R1 million. If they're raising R1 billion, they're typically then bigger. They have much more organized systems. They're audited, blah, 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 blah. So all I can say is it depends on a number of things, that we look at. But ultimately, for us, also, it's an indication of seriousness of all the parties. Very, very difficult to give an indication without knowing what the work is likely to be. And we do always run the risk of pricing ourselves out of the market, because you get guys like senior people like Gordon, Barry, Ken, myself. We in fairness don't come cheap. But what we do offer that's different to everyone else is tremendous speed and efficiency in getting to a solution. And I think also really important for anyone raising capital for their business is if you're the CEO and you're ending up having to do a lot of meetings on the telephone with investors, you really only want to speak to a few that are highly qualified. You don't want to speak to 100 investors. Now you can do that through Warwick's system, because Warwick offers that solution with his algorithmic processes. In our lives, for most of the management teams we deal with, they really don't want to speak to too many people unless they really, really got to put money in, because they just don't have time.
Before I extend that same question through to Warwick, Gordon, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our worst nightmare is if someone takes the deal and they actually distribute it very widely, get a sample of the market, and then bring it to us and say, well, no, we're not going to pay you fees. We just want to see what you can get. And we throw a lot of resource at it, come up with the solution, and the client says, okay, thanks very much, I've had a change of heart. So that's why it's necessary to pay fees where we are. And perhaps I can just use an example. Just over a year ago, we had a client approach us for a real estate affordable housing deal in one of the target areas of USAID. And we said, who've you spoken to? And they said, oh, they've spoken to this bank and this bank. And we said, look, this is how we operate. We do charge fees, etc. And this is who we're going to take it to. And we listed 3 banks, and it included the 2 that they had spoken to. And they said, no, but we've spoken to them already. We said, no, but you spoke to the wrong person. And we came back in 3 weeks' time and said, here we go, here's the solution. What had happened, they'd actually taken, they'd taken an affordable housing deal to the sort of home loans department, which didn't have the expertise to deal with it. But
Right.
we were able to connect them very quickly and be more accurate. So that was a bit like a hole in one, a successful case. But yeah, that's why we do have a fee structure.
Yeah, you have many years of expertise, relationships, networking, and it's about speaking to the right person. And ultimately, it is a business. You have to justify your existence. Warwick, fees and process that SebVest follows through the African Trade Platform.
Yeah, Nick, it's our fee structure is just straightforward percentage per transaction. There's a lot less that goes into each transaction than what would happen with the process on the capital side. So it is a very different it's a structured approach. But yes, it is just a straight fee per transaction.
We have another question. Is there any mentorship support for SMEs on the benefits of utilizing the online platforms? Gordon, mentorship on your end. I will give a response on how we approached it as USAID, but let's start with New Capital.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship can sometimes be quite a patronizing term, and it's a wrong. I understand what the question is, but yes. I was about to say, no, we don't give mentorship, because that sort of suggests that we got someone with a business 101 textbook that we're trying to help. Not at all. What we do find is senior executives often don't know as much as they could about capital raising, or what the different options are available to them, or how best to approach it, or what kind of narrative to actually put in the information memorandum. Now, we certainly find if you're dealing with the DFIs, often it's quite important to have an ESG paragraph, or in fact more than a paragraph, to be quite heavy on where your ESG contribution is, because that's becoming increasingly important. So if I can use the word mentorship quite cautiously, we certainly find that there is a dimension where we are able to add value on how best to pitch a deal and what the angle might be. Particularly, I mean, coming from different backgrounds within our organization, and having done quite a bit of work in Africa, and knowing the challenges. I mean, I used to look after credit committees that did business in Africa. So yeah, so mentorship, yes, there is a role, but it's not teaching sort of business 101. It's at a fairly senior level.
I think an
Yeah.
important point, Warwick, just before I get to you, important point that you make there is that every capital provider and every process risk system has its own unique way of being approached. So customizing your application and making sure that you are talking to the individual as well as the institution becomes a really important exercise, and not everybody knows how to do that. Warwick, your approach to mentorship?
Yeah, Nick, I think the best way to approach this question is just with what SEBvest Capital is actually doing with USAID. It's in the directed countries within sub-Saharan Africa. There's actually offering it's a service to do assessments on companies just to see exactly where they are from a trade readiness, trade finance, supply chain purchase or finance perspective, to actually get them ready if they are looking to export or import products into their location. So if anyone listening would like to export or import products, and they do currently have capacity, currently are producing, buying, selling products, and would like to engage with us from an advisory perspective. We are currently in process at the moment of selecting companies in these various selected countries by USAID. So please pop us through a mail, and we'll respond to you just with a few questions just to get an overall view on whether you would qualify or not.
Maybe it's an opportunity that I can say that one of the things that we have done, along with finding capital providers and transactional advisors who can work with, the USA Trade Hub has actually gone out and set up a relationship with a financial learning solutions provider called NetCampus, purely on the need that there's this dire need for financial acumen, improved financial acumen in the various regions that we work with in Southern Africa. And not everybody has had the opportunity to work with big corporates and with the capital providers and knowing how to present and put together these applications. So NetCampus has designed these modules, educating and improving financial acumen, and they are able to facilitate this process, and they work very closely with our capital providers, SEBvest and New Capital, and to try to facilitate that, call it a mentorship and a way forward. Mark, we have a question that's come through. How is the USA Trade Hub able to work with us, and this is the client, and to have us be ready, be investor ready? This question is for Mark. So really around investor readiness and how that works with the USA Trade Hub.
Yeah, thank you. And I can give a little bit more color to just the bland answers I put on the chat group again. I was trying just to keep in real time, keep up with Georgia. She's has a lot of good questions. I think the key thing to remember again is just going back that when the bigger the company typically, and then it's a rough proxy. The amount of money they're raising is a rough proxy for how big the company itself will be, and again how institutionalized it is. So if you've got a bookkeeper doing your books in the evenings on a Thursday, Friday night, so you can review your numbers on a Saturday after the week's takings. The kind of work required to get you invested in is significant because the investors who are typically looking to place larger sums of money, and they're typically looking to speak in sophisticated language to people. So if the people aren't really clear on the difference between debt and equity, then there's a fundamental problem for us. Someone's got Hardy guys in the background there. Gordy, is that you?
No, that would be me.
I've got one in the drawer here, Mark.
Apologies for that, for the background music.
Yeah, absolutely. A sacred artist. I'm not so sacred they do that at 4 in the morning. So what I was saying is that it's really important then that the investors can have a conversation with a sophisticated capital seeker. And that level of sophistication goes up with the amount of money being raised. And it is one of the grave challenges in Africa or in any market in the world is this funding gap. How do you raise smaller sums of money for businesses that so desperately need it? So we hear often that it's the small businesses that create jobs. I mean, I think that's, personally, I'm not always completely convinced about that. But at a certain point they do. And I think that this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And it's very, very difficult to do it efficiently because the nature of the issues are so complex. If you're bringing an investor into your business and they're going to become a shareholder, this isn't like marriage. I mean, this is marriage to the nth power because you've got to live with somebody where you don't love them, but you got to live with them for a long period of time. I mean, what difficult stuff. So these kinds of complexities require a great deal of wisdom and a lot of experience in trying to find the right parties to put money into your business, to try and find because not all of them are a one-night stand. You know, if it's a short-term loan for a trade finance deal, you might argue that's more like a one-night stand. And what we're doing is probably more like a long-term marriage. As I said, and you may not love each other passionately, but you're in business together, and it means a lot of careful thought and planning.
Thank you for that, Mark. Warwick, I don't know if there's a comment that you possibly want to make towards that about investor readiness and working with the Trade Hub.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I think Mark covered it quite well, Nico. I mean, there's a big difference between a direct investment and a trade transaction. It trades quick. You're focusing more on the transaction, on the product. You de-risk the transactions and in different ways from a finance perspective to a direct investment, which is long-term. It is like a marriage versus a transaction where that can take a week. Transactions done, it's liquidated, and you're moving on to the next transaction from a financier's perspective.
We have a question that I want my colleague to answer. Liseko, are you able to bring Hans on board so that he can answer a question for me, one coming through from the audience? Just trying to see how to do that. Hans has come on. Thank you. Hans, we have a question from the audience asking how the USA Trade Hub can help facilitate investor readiness to introduce ourselves to the client to our capital providers.
Thanks, Nick, and good morning, everyone. A good question. I think, as was touched on, within all the countries where we have a presence that we target, our priority countries, which were listed, I think, early in the beginning, we have country representatives that would guide you, that you should reach out to and engage. And I'll ask my colleagues, the country reps, to post their email addresses. Who can then engage with you, one, starting from a perspective of the trade or business you're doing, and then based on that, start to engage with you to see how best we can then be of value to you. And part of this value is that, as was mentioned, we have a team of transaction advisors that have been retained, and these are partly from Sebvest Capital Partners and Nations Capital that would then assign to you to support you in terms of making you, should I call you, say, investor ready, or preparing the necessary pitch documents or information memorandum that would then be shared with the likes of New Capital and out there with the market to then start sourcing the different potential investors. Now, the cost of the transaction advice is a shared cost. It's not entirely free, but of course, we find ways in which we can support you as the USA Trade Hub. But also the fact that we have retained the advisors at least makes that process shorter in terms of getting the engagement going. So if you need this help, I would encourage that you reach out to our country reps, and then we can then see how best we move it forward. Thanks.
Hans, thank you very much for that. It seems like we are running out of questions coming through from our audience. So but we have used quite a bit of time, and maybe it's time to move towards wrapping up. If there are no more questions, and I'll give it a moment, I'm going to ask our panelists maybe to give their final comments and about what we have just discussed. If you can summarize in a few sentences. Gordon, can we begin with you, your final comments?
Yeah, just thanks everyone for your time and for listening to us. And we are committed to trade between Sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa and also the US. And yeah, I mean, the process is working. We collaborate with our other partners on the USA hub. And if we can assist, we'd be very happy to.
Thank you for that, Gordon. Mark?
Firstly, if I may, I'll just give Georgia the courtesy again of another question, but another good one.
Sure, please do. I mean, that is what we have.
On the use of natural products such as indigenous botanicals, I mean, we certainly see the health, the nutraceutical space, the what I would call the retailization. In other words, taking the stuff into retail and into the mass market as a big play. There's definitely, I mean, a lot of it requires good branding and some good research, but we do see space in that. And I mean, the one extreme of that is medicinal cannabis, and then the other extreme of that would be things like rooibos tea. So yeah, we get that. I think the closing comment I'd have, Nico, is I mean, we are really well suited to people who are sophisticated, looking for capital to drive their businesses. We're passionate about making a difference in Africa and making sure that capital flows into the right places. Probably our biggest challenge on a day-to-day basis as a team is to make sure that we we prioritize those transactions to which we can add the most value the fastest. And unfortunately, we can't do everything. So you will find sometimes we will simply not be able to do things, but we do try to make sure that we are adding value at our highest point of contribution.
Thank you for that, Mark. Warwick, final comment from you?
Well, thank you very much for having us today. It's Nick and the USA Trade Hub. From our side, we see a huge amount of growth that's going to take place in Africa over the next 10 to 20 years. If you look at markets in the US, Europe, certain parts of Asia, it's becoming extremely saturated. Organizations are looking for growth, and all we're doing is providing a mechanism that opens up transparency to the trade process, links buyers, sellers, financiers, logistics providers to increase efficiencies and to help that growth actually take place at a faster pace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warwick, for those comments. So maybe it's my closing remarks, just listening to the discussion. It is a hugely important sector that we are going into, and these platforms can only get better. So cross-border traffic and access to products and services around the world, I think today is easier and more accessible through technology, the likes developed by Severus Capital and New Capital. And in the same way, I believe that Google gave the internet meaning by digitizing your search requests. I think digital platforms will give order to cross-border exchanges. I think they are as important today as building roads and ports, not only within countries, but between these countries. So access to digital platforms is ever more important, and the lack of access to digital infrastructure, I think, will result in small and medium-sized businesses being left behind. So as a business owner, I truly believe you need to transform your business into the digital space and be a part of that. Find out more about these digital platforms and see how they work, and access the requirements that by working with these individuals. So without that, I'm going to ask you to please look at our various websites. I'm going to read out some of these so that you can find out more information. They are also available in the presentation that was set through. So the USA Trade Hub's website is satihub, That's satihub.com, satihub.com. At the end of the presentation, we'll also have a list of all the country representatives within the Southern African countries that we work with. Their contact details are there for you to access them too. Sebvest website is sebvestcapitalpartners.com or SEBVEST capitalpartners.com. Their trade platform is known as the African Trade Platform, which is africantradeplatform.com. New Capital is on newcapital.africa, and that is neucapital.africa. So with that, I think we've come to the end. We don't have any more questions. I want to thank our panelists, Gordon, Mark, and Warwick, for an insightful discussion and the questions from our audience. It's been wonderful. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy your holiday festivities with your families.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you. Thanks to the audience.